Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to report some sad news about television icon Jerry Springer. It is passing away at the age of 79 from pancreatic uh, cancer. Earlier today, it was reported by his family that he passed away peacefully in his Chicago home. Now, in our 90s, video and review, decade in review video, we talked about the legacy of Jerry Springer on television and what it meant as far as being an icon that represents that decade, the 1990s. Um, and we talked about how he his style of presentation on television was different than what had come before him and really at what had come since. What had came before him was Oprah Winfrey, Sally Jesse Raphael, and Phil Donahue, which was more focused on serious type issues, social issues. And initially, Jerry Springer, whose show started in 1991, was initially focused on things like that as well. But as the decade progressed and the decade became more typified by the attitude that people remember the decade by, which was carefree. You know, you had artists like Left Eye burning down her boyfriend Andre Rison's house. You had the rise of WWE and the raunciousness of the Attitude Era, and you had the rise of things like gangster rap. And Jerry fit right along with those things because as his show progressed, it became raunchy. It became outrageous. You would have storylines where people would participate in incest with each other. You would have storylines where people would come out to their mate that they say they've been with for 2 or 3 years, and they would come up to them as transgender, or somebody would come out to another person as gay and secretly having a crush on them, or KKK members and members of the Hebrew Israelites would be on the stage together. And ultimately, chaos would ensue and it would break down into fights and people would start throwing chairs and they would start chanting Jerry, Jerry, Jerry. The chant itself became so synonymous with the era, especially from 1998 to 2003, 4, that even when you were in school and you would have a fight, that's what people would automatically chant Jerry, Jerry. It was it was just something that we remember it by. It was like one of those artifacts of an era and artifacts of a decade that you can never forget. But one of the things I learned about Jerry Springer's life that I didn't know was his involvement with politics. His involvement with politics started in the 1960s when he worked closely with Robert Kennedy's campaign. And then from there, in 1974, he was elected to city council in the city of Cincinnati, and he had to resign because of a sex scandal. We always heard those rumors about Jerry that he was uh, a precocious he had a precocious a strong sexual appetite, but he actually ran for re-election and he won again in the mid 70s. But and that's what he studied at in his university, Tulane University in New Orleans, political science. So that was his background essentially. But when he moved away from politics to go to radio, then he started. That's when he started to hone his broadcasting skills. And then in 1991, he finally got his talk show in Chicago. And like I said in the beginning, it was a more serious show, it was a more somber show, it was a more reflective show. But as times changed, so did he. And eventually, in 1998, he surpassed Oprah in popularity. He surpassed her in the ratings because her show had become, she'd become more focused on celebrity types like Dr. Oz and Dr. Phil, more talk showish and more tried to become more intellectual. She started her book club at this time, and the culture just wasn't feeling it. She was past her prime. She was past the cultural zeitgeist. But Jerry was tapping into the rambunctiousness, into the wildness of the time, and he had the biggest following in the world. And this might be controversial to say, but I would say among minorities and among people of color and black folks, for example, I would say that uh, he was probably invited to the cookout more times than Oprah Winfrey, and probably respected more as a cultural icon in the black community more than Oprah Winfrey. Uh, a lot of the times, who was generally viewed as a looking down her nose at people, and looking down at people, or trying to act like she was. Yeah, hey, embracing China, nice to see you back. Yeah, uh, trying to seem like she was better. He says, the death surprised me. Apparently, he averaged 12 million viewers at one time. Yes, he did. And of course, embracing China would know that Jerry was heavily engaged with the WWE community. Vince Russo, Vince Russo actually borrowed a lot from Jerry Springer. He often says that he and Ed Ferrara would sit down every afternoon and watch Jerry Springer, and that's where they got a lot of their scripts from in the also famous Attitude Era. So they fed off his vibe. They copied his vibe a lot, and you could see a lot in their storylines, especially like the transgender storyline with Sammy and Mark Henry, and a lot of the crazier Attitude Era stuff like Choppy Choppy the Pee Pee. And WWE knew this, that Jerry was a part of their community and was well beloved by the community of wrestling fans as well. They invited Jerry Springer on the show in 2014. Remember that segment he did with the Bellas? And then he had a Too Hot for TV segment on the WWE network. Yeah, Bracing China says actually he thought Jerry looked awkward in his WWE segments. Yeah, he kind of did, but I mean, they were part of the same. They're part of the same time frame essentially, and part of the same uh, crash TV type culture. So even though he didn't really fit in, hell, he looked awkward on his own show a lot of the time. A lot of the times, Jerry would just be sitting there and he would let the chaos ensue. He wouldn't interject himself, and then he would give, of course, his final thoughts on what was going on what had just transpired, and try to intellectualize the situation. Because, like I said, he um he started his career in a serious tone in politics, and differently than Oprah, he went to the more showy route. He went to the more outrageous route, and she went to the serious route. Even though she started in the scandalous route in the '80s, she moved to the more serious route. Whereas he started in the serious route and he moved more towards the outrageous route in the '90s. So yeah, I agree. He didn't really fit in WWE Raw in the appearances that he made, or the Spring Break appearances that he would do, because he would do the Spring Break appearances in MTV in the mid '90s. But he never really fit in his show either. I mean, even think about this: he would have he would have KKK members and neo Nazis on the. He would have KKK members and neo Nazis on his show, and this is a man who was of Jewish descent, and he actually escaped London at the age of 4, escaping from the Nazis. So his family was well acquainted with persecution and white supremacy, and here he was sitting on the stage with people who hated him. Uh, Apparently, people, white supremacists, KKK members, outright anti-Semites, outright racist. Lisa saying his show was the WWE. Yeah, his show was very similar to the WWE, Lisa. And like Lisa was saying to me earlier today, his show was for people, the general public that didn't watch the WWE. That was their exposure. uh, that was their exposure to the WWE. But I think one thing that was good about that, even though we laugh about things like that, the craziness that ensued, it exposed people to the ugly side of racism and the silliness of racism and anti-Semitism and bigotry in those episodes. Because it wasn't like we were seeing those things every single day, or those people would even make themselves known. But on Jerry Springer, they would make themselves known. Believe me, they would expose their ugly. Uh, yeah, they would expose their ugly side. He said, "Embracing China says his show would not be accepted in 2023. We are too easily offended, which is absurd." And I agree with that. That's just like the Attitude Era. That's why we don't see the Attitude Era anymore. That's why we don't see gangster rap anymore. We don't see those outrageous things that we loved in the 90s, which uh, Springer was a part of it. We won't see any of that no more. You know what I mean? We've moved from in an era in the 90s where we really didn't care, we really didn't give a fuck, to now we give a fuck about every little thing. Every little thing offends us. Every little thing is a big news story. Every little thing is offensive. Every little thing is something, a hill to die on. Every little thing is a new moral crusade. Uh, you know, we're more offended now than we ever were in all of American history. Every little thing is like, okay, this is the next moral crusade. This is the next moral outrage, fake outrage, like Chris Rock said. Um, yeah, and that's what and Lisa was saying. That's what made his show good. Absolutely, he showed us education through the prism of absurdity. He educated us through the prism of absurdity. Now, we can't take that anymore. We can't take offensiveness, and we don't understand that being offended is part of being human. If you're not offended, you're not paying attention or you're not feeling, and you have to be offended sometimes. You have to be rubbed the wrong way. That's a genuine human emotion. And in the 90s, people wanted to offend. Everything was about being offensive. Like I said, gangster rap was offensive. His show was offensive. The Attitude Era was offensive. Um, Politics was offensive. I mean, hell, look at the Bill Clinton scandal. Bill Clinton, getting a blowjob right in the Oval Office, and people turning the Oval Office into the Oral Office. That was the 90s, you know, and that had never been the case in American history. Americans had always been, prior to that and after that, very high strung and very sensitive. The things that we're sensitive about are different now, and they're kind of reversed, but we're still hypersensitive like we were in the 80s, for example. But in the 90s, that wasn't the case. They threw the rule book out the window, and we loved them for it. And Jerry Springer was just as much a part of that as anything else. Other shows tried to imitate, but they could never really duplicate. Embracing China says sometimes being offensive is about exposing the truth, and that's the point I was trying to make. That uh, and he respects people who tell him the truth. Exactly, that's the point I'm trying to make. Uh, in the 90s, we were all about bluntness. We were all about truth, especially the late 90s. And he was on Judge Jerry for a while, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. Lisa, it didn't have that vibe. The culture had changed, especially with the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. The culture had changed. You know what I mean? It was the 90s was almost like a dream. You know what I mean? And we just had to wake up. It was too good. It was too good to be true in a sense. We had that 10 years of peace. We didn't have really a lot of international conflict, at least with other countries in the United States. We were like in our own little bubble. So, uh, okay. Lisa says Judge Jerry was 2 years ago. And Embracing China says, I think Judge Jerry was trying to become Judge Judy, and that didn't work. Yeah, Lisa says he's been hosting a folk music show at the radio station in Cincinnati. That's the radio station he started it. Uh, and also a tie into WWE, another tie into WWE. Who remembers when the late Razor Ramon, aka Scott Hall, gave those two children with HIV the Intercontinental Championship? He gave them the actual real championship, and then he calls Vince up and he says, "I need a new belt delivered for the show tonight because I just gave these two kids the title." And that was like in 95, 96, before Jerry even broke out in popularity. So he always had a great rapport with the wrestling community. But yeah, that was the Cincinnati station was the station he started off in. But actually, I heard I heard a couple of interviews, read a couple of interviews with Jerry, where he said that he regretted he regretted the impact, the social impact that his show had on society. So while we're praising it, while the three of us are sitting here praising it and saying that it was great and it had a huge impact on society and a positive impact on society, Jerry himself felt that the show had a negative impact on society, and he kind of regretted the genie that he let out of the bottle, so to speak, or and what the degradation, as he saw it, that his show led to in television quality. So I'm sure he was proud of his work, but he wasn't proud of the impact that his work had on society. So that's kind of interesting. When you started something and you got the ball rolling and you had this kind of impact, and everybody loves you for it, but you kind of like, that's not my proudest moment. You know what I mean? You would think he would praise it as his magnum opus, but I think I think that he wanted to do something. He wanted to do something more uh, serious. I believe that he never really. It was kind of like Jim Henson in a way. Jim Henson gave us the Muppets, but he always wanted to do something more serious than the Muppets and wanted to do something beyond children's programming. So I think with Jerry, one of the reasons he kind of regretted it, and one of the reasons he didn't really look on it with such pride. Yeah, embracing China is saying that uh, he was fine with making the millions. But I think one of the reasons why he didn't look on it with such pride was because he really wanted, I believe so, in his heart of hearts, he wanted to do something more serious and something more educational, kind of like the McLaughlin show on PBS, where they discuss serious social topics, but that just that wasn't what it panned out to be. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I said, like Jim Henson wanted to be this serious kind of puppeteer and take puppetry in a whole nother direction, more serious, out of children's programming, but he got kind of stuck in that rut, and he carved out a niche for himself and never really got beyond that. Kind of like Vince, you know, Vince McMahon. Vince wanted to do so much more than wrestling, but was never able to move beyond wrestling, you know, in any sort of successful way. So I think that was it more with Jerry, seeing as though he started him out in politics. He wanted to do something more political, but I mean, his show turned out what his show turned out to be, which was a wild and crazy social experiment. Now, he took this secret to his grave, and the secret was Jerry Springer, was his show, was it for real, or was it actually a put on? Was Were the guests really as they presented? I would suspect that maybe in the beginning they were it was kind of in line with reality, and it wasn't as fake. But as the show progressed, and the writers and the producers saw that the show became more successful and garnered more ratings, the more outrageous it became. I would think then that it became more fake. You know, and as people in the wrestling industry would say, it was a work. It was uh, it was phony. You know, because as the years progressed, 98 to 99, 2000, they became more outrageous. It would go from like somebody reveals that they were gay to a crush, to somebody reveals that they were gay to that crush, and then the crush turns out to be, not only do they reveal their homosexuality, but they turn out to be their actual brother, or they turn out to be their sister. And it was just things that were beyond the pale of believability at a certain point. And you were like, okay, I get this. This is all fake, right? You know what I mean? These are all actors. This is all too outrageous to be anything, any kind of semblance of reality. And it's just like Maury. You know what I mean? Yeah, okay, one guy comes out as a baby daddy. He's not the baby daddy. Then another guy comes out as the baby daddy. He's not the baby daddy. But then you have like 80 people come out as the baby daddy, you know, and none of them are the baby daddy. Come on, though. This is getting to be a little bit too ridiculous now. So at a certain point, I believe it was a work, it was fake, it was staged. You know what I mean? Because just the outrageousness, how it all became, and the fact that nobody ever died from it, or if not outright staged and they were outright actors pretending, maybe they were prompted in certain ways. Because that's what happened with the Jenny Jones murder, back in '95. That's like you referencing the outing, the gay outing, because on the Jenny Jones show in '95, this guy revealed to another guy that he had a crush on him and he was gay, and the guy ended up killing that same guy and being convicted of murder. And the Jenny Jones show, of course, got blamed for it, and that's when, in the court deposition, Jenny Jones admitted that her producers prompt the guest to say certain things. So while it may not have been outright staged, it was some sort of way manipulated. But I think with Springer, it wasn't just prompted, it was outright staged, and they were outright actors, especially at a certain point. Steve Wilkos, who had the spinoff of the show, he was, of course, the bodyguard. He was known for looking like Stone Cold Steve Austin, actually, bald head, former Chicago PD. He he got his own show, and his show was even more outrageous, where they would do these lie detector tests, and then the people would come back. It was, yeah. Embracing China says it's hard to believe that people go on these shows and embarrass themselves like that without getting paid. Yeah, I think so too. But then again, you never know. It could be, lies by the producers. It could be they don't really tell them what the premise of the show is. But then again, if they did that, they would get sued. So you just never really know. I think that it's kind of like wrestling in a way. Again, I keep going back to this example because, like Lisa said, I think they're parallels. You know what I mean? I think they're parallel phenomena, and they represent something in our culture. Some would say a degradation in our culture. Some would say kind of like the bread and circuses uh, of the late Roman Empire. Kind of like, the Romans had they fed Christians to the lions, and we had Jerry Springer in WWE. But it's kind of parallel in the sense that wrestling probably didn't start off as staged and something for purely monetary gain. It started off as a genuine competition, but over time they said do this, and do that, and eventually it morphed into something completely different than what the objective. So maybe these talk shows, even Springer included, they did start off as something, something genuine. And eventually, they figured out where their sweet spot is. They figured out where their money was made, where their bread is buttered, so to speak. and they went with that. Lisa says after the Jenny Jones situation, I think they all had scripted stage acts. Yeah, to play it safe. You know what I mean? I agree to play it safe. You know what I mean? Because you don't want people dying. You know, you don't want genuine accidents like that to happen because you never can gauge. Even like shows like Cheaters, you can never really gauge what people's reactions are going to be. You know what I mean? You, you tell them something like that. You tell them something uh, like they've been in love with their sister the whole time, or the person they were in love with is actually uh, somebody of the same gender, and they're not gay. You know, they're probably even by the '90s standards, they're probably homophobic because there was a lot of homophobia, more homophobia in the '90s than there is today. LGBT culture wasn't really accepted. More generally, tell somebody like that you can never really gauge how they're going to react, how they're going to take it. So you have to kind of prepare them and prompt them. And look, there was a Jerry movie. Everybody knew this. This was kind of a wink and a nod thing. In the '90s, everybody kind of suspected the show was fake because there was a movie where everybody, this one movie about Jerry Springer, everybody, the characters on the show were going on the Jerry Springer show, and they would show like behind the scenes things what would probably happen on the show. So Jerry took it with a grain of salt that people understood this show was it was an understanding uh, um, generally by the society that the show was fake. You know what I mean? And that it was just for entertainment purposes only. But I mean, whether it was fake or not, we didn't care, man. We enjoyed it. We loved it. We ate it up, and it was when you stood home from school, what did you watch? You know what I mean? The Jerry Springer show, the Maury show. These were the shows that were on daytime TV and that dominated daytime TV. And it made you have a sense of self confidence in a way. Because you'd be like, damn, my situation is really bad, but I'm not as bad as those. I'm not my situation, as bad as my situation is, or as bad as a person I think I am morally, I'm not as morally bankrupt as these individuals here. At least I'm not on Jerry Springer, making a fool of myself. You know what I mean? You can have a kind of moral superiority about the whole thing. But like, damn, well, at least I'm not a KKK member. Hey, Sean, what's going on? It was pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer. You'd be like, damn, at least I'm not on the Jerry Springer show or making a fool of myself. You know what I mean? Doing this crazy, crazy, outlandish shit. Yeah, pancreatic cancer embracing China. Yep. Pancreatic cancer ain't no joke, man. I always say get checked up early and checked up often because you never know when it might be there, and you want to catch cancer really early, guys. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to let it lapse and let it fester because it's cancer. It'll grow and it'll grow and then it'll spread to the rest of your organs, and you just never know. You know what I'm saying? And we hear those stories too about Jerry, International Enquirer, hooking up with hookers and shit like that. It'd be interesting to see uh, uh, a biography movie about his life. Yeah, Embracing China says Michael Landon, who of course lived from the guy from Little House on the Prairie, died in 1991 from pancreatic cancer as well. Yeah, man, cancer, especially that kind of cancer, is no joke, man. You know what I'm saying? But those internal organs, what I mean, you want to get that checked out, man. Well, I could see a biography movie about Jerry's life, man, coming out and just exposing Jerry for all the craziness he did. Lisa says, according to TMZ, he was diagnosed only a few months ago. So, man, his cancer spread. But, exposing Jerry for all the wild shit he did, backstage, hooking up with hookers, probably wild, wild parties involved and shit, you know, for real. Sean says cancer, period, is bad. Yep. Right. Uh, Embracing China says, but the problem is pancreatic cancer is hard to diagnose until it's too late. Absolutely. Yeah, man. I mean, I'm no medical expert, but, you know, shit's crazy, man. But definitely, Jerry's one of those that invited to the cookout for sure. He was beloved. He was a beloved figure in the '90s. In all areas in society, man. I mean, if you got into a fight in the '90s, like Lisa was saying, in junior high school, whatever, you got into a fight in the '90s, people started chanting Jerry, Jerry. That was gonna happen. You know what I mean? Because I mean, rumbling, man, throwing chairs, throwing bodies. If when the show came on, you were like, okay, they're about to get into a fight, and you couldn't wait for that fight to happen. You know what I'm saying? It was about to go down. Somebody would say something crazy, another person would be like, "Oh, motherfucker!" And they start punching each other. Man, it gets me excited just thinking about it. How cool it was back then, and you just wanted to stay home from school just to watch that shit, see what was gonna go down. But I find it interesting too that a lot of them old school talk show hosts are still most of them are still alive. You know, me and Lisa was doing the rundown of like Donahue, of like Sally Jesse Raphael, all them, and they're all still alive. They're all still living. But when talk show hosts retired, they, they stay pretty low key. They're not like other celebrities. They don't be popping up here and popping up there. Embracing China says the '90s was a better decade than the modern era. You're not getting an argument from anybody here, I don't think. From Lisa, from me, from Sean. None of us is going to argue that uh, in all ways in society, the '90s was way better. You know what I mean? I don't think. I know from myself, speaking for me personally, and from you embracing China, from what I know about the conversations we have on here, and from Sean, all of us here that's on this live on this chat is going to agree with you there. I mean, just in every way in society, it was just better. People were more straightforward. People were more real. People were more blunt, and they didn't care what we lived to offend back then. You know what I'm saying? We, we lived to make you uncomfortable. You know what I mean? That was the culture back then. Now we live to make you comfortable. If we don't, rather than engage in conflict and throw chairs and shit, nowadays people just say what they think you want to hear, and they're just phony with it. You know what I mean? Music isn't as good. TV isn't as good. Nothing is as good anymore. Nothing is what it used to be because people are just fake, and people, you know, one of the biggest slogans in the '90s was, "You got to keep it real." You know, you know what I mean. And now it's like You know, people want to just they don't want to offend, so they don't want to say anything. So everybody just stays shut. And people ain't even interacting with each other no more. You know, you go to schools nowadays. One of the things that we loved when we was growing up back then is lunchtime when we'd all talk with each other and we all socialize and we all interact with each other, laughing and joking and just bullshit around. And now you go to lunchrooms today in the schools and in the high schools and the junior highs, and they're all looking at their phones, being on social media. You know what I mean? So social media kind of, even though we're on social media right now, making a YouTube video kind of destroyed the world if you really stop and think, because it caused people to not interact with each other anymore, you know, face to face or verbally, and it caused people to stay shut and really stay to themselves. And that I feel is like that's not good for society. So I mean, yeah, embracing China since especially back then, uh, uh, we developed real relationships with each other. Yeah, real friendships, real bonds with each other because wasn't afraid to tell each other how we felt. And I think that's what Jerry Springer was really all about to me. Is kind of yeah, the outrageousness, but Jerry was, I mean, Jerry touched on some real shit, man. Especially like I said with the racism shit, things we're afraid to discuss nowadays, and if it is discussed, it's all one sidedness. You know what I'm saying? It's all just bullshit. We're all just bullshitting each other and just saying what we think each other wants to hear, which is not in any way how life should be led. You know what I mean? We should all speak the truth. What our true opinions are. And if you don't like it, fuck it. You know what I'm saying? And that's the people on Jerry Springer did. You know what I mean? Whether or not they was playing a character or not, they they spoke what they felt at the time when they felt it. You know what I mean? And that's what all '90s culture, in my opinion, all '90s pop culture was speaking the truth or your opinion when you felt it and how you felt it, and not giving a fuck what anybody thought about you. That's what rap was about back then. That's what Springer was about back then. That's what even wrestling was about back then. That's what movies were about back then. None of this BS of like, okay, I got to worry about what he feels. Got to worry about microaggressions. I got to worry about all this other words that we never even heard of. They never even existed in our vocabularies back in the day. They just started popping up in the last 10 or 5 to 10 years ago. That they're coming up with new shit every single day. You know what I mean? To things that we shouldn't say, list of words that we can no longer say. Fuck that, man. Do I remember when society started to change? I would say that probably around uh, probably I would say around like the 2010s ish, 2010s, 2011 ish. Then it kind of really sped up in 2016, where it kind of accelerated. Like the newer generation just wasn't into that and kind of afraid of getting reactions out of people. You know what I mean? Because political correctness had taken over in society, even in music. Like now, you got the rap songs where they talk a lot of shit, but right, embracing China, saying, "Remember the scandals like Harvey Weinstein." I think that had a lot to do with it, but it was kind of before that. But even in music, though, it's like they're saying a lot of crazy shit, but they're not really saying anything. I mean, look, Drake getting offended by the Rich Flex memes of the parody of his song Rich Flex. I mean, come on, man. Back in the days, rappers had people shooting at them. You know what I'm saying? They actually died, you know what I mean, over song lyrics. I mean, it's fucked up, but it was a genuine reaction. Now, what do? Twitter battles on Twitter between rappers that are supposed to be these tough, real gangster dudes, and they're fucking battling instead of taking it to records or battling on the streets. They're taking it to fucking Twitter. No, that's how sensitive babies that they are, and they react to everything. And that's another thing. They react to everything. The more you react to things, the more you show that it bothers you. If you just let it roll off your back, then you show that you ain't as emotional. But yeah, I think the Harvey Weinstein shit contributed to it. I think a lot of things, just that the millennial society, the Zoomer society, the kids of the millennials, um, kind of were protected. And it's weird because we as millennials, this is the culture we grew up in, the Jerry culture. And we didn't grow up that way. We grew up different. But yeah, Howard sold out. He changed. He's not Howard Stern anymore. He's the man Howard Stern, but he's not the Howard Stern that we once knew. He and another thing, what happened too, I think, yeah, in my opinion, was that the corporate culture got involved with a lot of the things we loved. They got involved with hip hop. They got involved with um, bigger, more so involved with bigger corporate conglomerates in television. They got involved with wrestling. They got involved with all the things that we loved that made 90s culture edgy, and they brought their corporate fake culture into it. Corporate culture always kind of been this PC kind of bullshit. You know what I mean? But those kinds of entertainments that we all loved and we all embraced really weren't involved in corporate culture that much. You know what I mean? But then these big corporations got in and they started bringing their corporate fake culture of pretending to like somebody. Because as we know in the sitcom The Office, nobody liked anybody, but nobody said anything because that's the kind of office culture that exists. The kind of office corporate environment. And when corporations got involved and big money got involved, things changed. People got real fucking fake. you know, and that's what I think happened too. Is that the corporate culture got involved in music and got involved in television and all the things we loved, and they just ruined it. They ruined it with political correctness, thinking they're doing the right thing. That's funny because a saying in life is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know what I mean? So when you think you're doing the right thing, you're probably doing the wrong thing. you know, and the boomer culture got involved. And the boomer culture looked at things differently than us millennials or us you know, like the Gen X culture because the boomers kind of wanted everything to be like 1960s esque and everybody politeness and all this kind of stuff. But it wasn't real. it was phony. So, they took it to its two logical extremes. Sure, you don't want to be real offensive, and you don't want to be discriminatory and shit, but at the same time, they took they said, okay, we don't want to be offensive anymore. We don't want to be racist. We don't want to be homophobic. None of that shit. But we'll take it to its logical extreme, its logical other side of the extreme, and we'll say we don't want to say nothing anymore, and we'll just pretend, you know, that we feel this way, even though we don't. Yeah, embracing China is saying that he feels like boomers had it a bit easier in some ways, finding jobs, buying homes, simpler times. Well, of course, embracing China. This is way off topic, but this was something that Lisa and I were discussing uh, earlier today about that. Is that it's because at that time that was the end of the end of World War II. America was at its zenith in terms of political and cultural relevancy. So and financial stability. So of course, um, there was a more surplus. There's more pieces of the pie to go around when there's more of a pie. When there's a bigger pie, of course you could have more slices. But when there's a smaller pie and there's more economic competition from other countries and a smaller pie because bigger corporate monopolies are swallowing up other corporate monopolies, of course you're not going to have as much to go around for the little guy. The success is not going to trickle down. It's going to stay at the top. You know what I mean? So it's going to be like, say you got say you have Kool-Aid, right? And you pour a lot of sugar into that glass of Kool-Aid. The sugar is not going to spread around to the rest of the glass. It's going to stay right there at the bottom. So that's how this new economic prosperity is manifesting. Nobody's getting an equal share of the wealth or an equal share of the pie. All the sugar, all the good stuff is staying at the complete bottom of the cup. Hey, hey, John, what's going on? So yeah, I agree with embracing China on that. But anyway, guys, um, rest in peace to Jerry Springer. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, Big Dog, for returning to the channel. Nice to see you again. Sean, thanks for contributing. Always much love. One of my best friends from way back in the day in elementary school. Lisa, of course, thank you for contributing. Take care of yourselves and each other. Rest in peace, Jerry Springer.